Welcome to Inspire Campfire, a podcast where ordinary people tell their stories of extraordinary adventure. These are campfire stories meant to inspire the rest of us to light the fire within, get outside, follow our dreams, and return to tell our own stories. Ready? Let's strike the match.
Welcome to the show. I'm your host, Scott Wurtzbacher, and today I'm really excited because we're going to hear a story from an adventurer that gets right to the heart of this podcast. Our guest is Wil Lavender, who just completed a coast-to-coast 4,200-mile cycling adventure from the Pacific Ocean in Washington State to the Atlantic in New York. I've been following his 2.5-month journey on Instagram and was so excited to connect with him as soon as he got back just 2 weeks ago. Wil lives in Charlotte, North Carolina, and he was a senior finance manager at Wells Fargo Bank. He'd worked hard his whole life and was feeling like it was time for a change. With no plan for the future, Wil left his job to embark on this once-in-a-lifetime journey. He gifted this trip to himself after years of working hard for others. And now we get to talk to Wil about his dream, his process, his experience, and now that he's returned, how it changed him forever. Wil, welcome to the campfire.
Thanks, Scott. Thanks for having me.
Man, I'm so excited. Let's just dive right in. If you could just share maybe a kind of an overview of this journey that you just got back from.
Well, you did great job introing. So the last 10 years, I've been busting my butt at work. It was always like kind of a goal of mine to like work my way up. I'm an ambitious person, highly motivated, self-motivated. So I started with a company here in Charlotte 10 years ago and worked my way up, pretty well from an analyst all the way to like kind of a senior manager, leading a large group of people, a lot of big initiatives, high exposure to like the CFO and other executives in the company, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And I think it was over the last like year and a half or so, I guess two years now, that I realized I kind of wanted a change. I wanted something a little different, but I also knew that a couple times I would explore like kind of looking at what other roles were out there and things like that, and it just felt so overwhelming to me.
Mm-hmm.
It was like, oh, like just the information online, everything is unbelievable today, but how you filter that is, I mean, that's half the challenge. So I remember approaching my wife after we had taken some vacation and actually was skiing out west, and I always used vacation to kind of just reset, kind of get my do something usually outdoors that just made me feel better, that sort of thing, and I'd come back a little more clear-headed, make smart decisions early on, that sort of thing. So after that trip, I kind of came back and I just said to my wife, I was like, I'm thinking about a change. I really want to change. I'm dead certain that if I try to do a change and try to continue to be successful at what I'm doing at work right now, I'm more than likely going to either bomb the change or bomb what I'm doing at work and leave a bad taste in work's mouth. I live by the principle, like, you can't have two number one priorities. Like you end up giving 50% to each thing, and then they both don't turn out that great.
Yeah.
So her feedback was awesome at the time, and I hadn't even thought about it. She's like, well, you've got a ton of mentors and you've got a ton of peers and things that, and folks that you went to college with and whatnot that have gone through lots of different experiences. Why don't you reach out to them and get their perspective on it? So spent time kind of exploring that, talking to a lot of folks, and the feedback was like overwhelming. Like, wow, this is amazing, Wil. Like, and several people even kind of commented, I don't have kids. My wife and I are married now for almost 6 years, and I've been, I've always I feel like my house is a modest house. I don't have a flashy car. I've not overspent in a lot of things. So several people actually told me, they were like, Wil, you've actually been setting yourself up for something like this. You just didn't realize it.
Yeah.
And that's like, it was like kind of mind blowing. I was like, oh my gosh, you're right. I am so flexible right now. I've never even remotely thought of that. So, and again, none of this had to do with cycling across country. This all had to do with, is it okay to step away from something, especially something I've been really successful at, um, reset, and then look for something new because I knew I wanted to change. And again, that feedback was overwhelming, decided to do it. And I'm the type of person that once I kind of make a decision, I'll stir on it, usually a week or two before I like just kind of like set off on that path.
Sure.
And
Yeah.
while stirring on it, that's when I was like, man, I could, like, I've always been a cyclist. I've enjoyed longer rides. I like riding my bike somewhere and going camping for the night and riding home, that kind of thing. I've done some short trips and I have a few friends that I do things with over the years. And that's when I just thought to myself, I was like, holy cow, like I could go and do this trip that I've always kind of had in the back of my mind and wanted to do, and I'd finally be able to, kind of experience this. I'm healthy. I'm at a place, I'd kind of always thought, well, maybe this will be something I do when I retire, but who knows, if you even get there, who knows how healthy you can be, all that kind of stuff. So that I came in one night, it was like a Tuesday night after work. It's like 7:30, just got home and walked in and like put my keys on the counter. And my wife was like, "Hey, how'd work go?" And I go, "I'm quitting. I'm gonna ride my bike across country. When I get back, I'm gonna look for a job and we'll go from there." And she just hugged me and was like, "I'm so proud of you." And like it was just such a cool thing. And then that was, I guess, February. And then from there, it was just trying to figure out, okay, how do I make this work? Because taking, 2, 3 months off and like kind of getting ready for this and going from a chair potato sitting on a
Yeah.
desk, being in meetings all day, like not being super active, that sort of thing, to cycling like 80 miles a day for 70 days in a row, sort of thing. That's my brain immediately shifted, okay, to like, okay, how am I going to start doing this?
Yeah.
Um, and I originally planned to do it solo, but I'm sure we'll talk about it, like kind of things change
Yeah.
a lot during the process and kind
I,
of make
I need I need to stop and dig into a little bit because
sure.
I mean, and I want to get into like the adventure itself, but you went straight into some of the heart of like what this podcast is all about. It's about, listening to that voice inside that calls us to adventure and then having the courage to actually take action. And there's a couple of things that I just heard in what this was like, just really to summarize, like, I mean, I love that you said like you've been wanting this change, but you didn't feel that you could give 100% to two different things. Like, you're going to leave. So how can you give 100% like looking for something else? Like, that's just, there's so much integrity in that. And so the three things like that I just wrote down here is kind of taking notes as I was listening to you, like what you just did, it reeks of integrity. There's so much wisdom in it. And then there's a huge amount of courage, just that leap of faith. And it's super, super inspiring. And like, I want to, as we kind of go through this whole adventure, I mean, maybe we'll come back to this and round this out. But like at the end of the day, like that's what this podcast is about, is like listening to that voice and then just like having that courage to be able to step across. Like, what was that like for you?
Hmm. Well, it was helpful that that was a thing I was struggling with a lot at work, so that mindset and that using that integrity to think through this decision was something
Mhm.
that I took with me to work every day. And I was very blessed to have um, like coaches and mentors around me at work that help me realize that over my 10-year career. Um, and I think that, like, to me, that if you don't take that, if you have your work self and your home self and you don't kind of take that thinking at both places, you're letting yourself down. So that was a big component for me. It was just like, whatever I'm going to do, I'm going to put everything I can into it. And doing something at a percentage less than 100% is just setting yourself up for failure. And I wanted to be like, something that we were struggling with at work was like getting work done before moving on to the next thing.
Mhm.
And so I wanted to apply that to my life too. I was just like, all right, let's get done here and then let's go do this thing. And that actually kind of was a big component of my trip as well. Is like during that trip I kept thinking, like, do I need to start thinking about my next job? Do I need to start thinking about all these other things? And like I think it was the first day I was just like, no, like focus on this trip, focus on what I'm out here doing, focus on why I'm here, focus on the feelings that come and how I react to them and all that other stuff. Don't worry about that future stuff. So it was actually like totally fantastic to be singularly focused for a period of time. It was something that had eluded me my entire like professional life. I'd always
Yeah.
been, multi-focused where you're just, you can't filter at all, and you end up making some bad decisions, or you end up kind of overwhelmed. And so it was really refreshing to just basically say, I'm going to focus on one thing.
I mean, I wonder if you could talk about it. Was that new for you? Like this, I mean, it's just very aligned. It just seems like, again, it comes back to that word integrity, but just like,
Yeah.
is this a new thing for you or have you always carried this? My suspicion is it's always been who you are and who
Yeah.
you've always been, but it's maybe more just like coming to the forefront of awareness at this point.
Yeah, I think in the past, you mentioned something up front, like I gifted myself with this. I never even thought about it. I think this will like, kind of behind the scenes, that was something where I was just like, okay, I carry this integrity with me. I think this way. That's kind of the way I was born and raised, and the people around me, and all that good stuff. And um, I I think that it was important for me to just kind of say, okay, like let's take some of this time and energy and apply it to yourself.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because like you said that I use the word gift, but you actually, and maybe you didn't use the word gift, but the first time you and I spoke, when you were telling me about this trip, you were talking to me about how you've worked your whole life like really, really hard for other people, and this was something you needed to do for you. And
Yeah,
what I heard was I need to give myself a gift. So
yeah,
you might not have used the word, but you definitely were thinking that, which is pretty cool.
yeah. It's cool to think of that too, because it's by far the coolest gift I've ever given myself. So
Yeah. So can you speak to the courage part? I mean, there's this whole alignment and it's like, yes, I need to do this, but then like that crossing of the threshold, it takes courage like to walk in and say like, I'm done here and not know where you're going next. That's got to be scary.
yeah, that it totally was. I have such a good support system around me between my wife and my family. Um, and again, like I just know my own ability. And so I kind of knew in the back of my head, like, even with taking this time off and stepping into this unknown, the worst that, and this was good feedback I got from several folks, that were like, what's the worst that can happen? It's like the worst that could have happened is like, I'm 3 weeks into this trip, I'm hating it. I'm missing like work or something like that. And I call up some old folks and I'm like, hey, can I, my job's probably not available, but could I come back and work somewhere? And I had built such a
Yeah.
strong network and good relationship that like the worst case scenario, um, and it felt like that's not bad. Like
Yeah.
taking this risk isn't like as bad as you might immediately react to. Um, and to me, that's what gave me the strength to kind of like push through it. And then on top of it, like as soon as like this, like you plant a seed, an idea seed gets planted, especially something as cool as like spending 70 days outdoors on a bicycle where you're just like seeing things that you've never seen before. It was just like, okay, this seed's gonna grow really fast. So once
Yeah.
that got planted, I was kind of pot committed.
Totally. Okay, so I want to talk about the trip itself. That's what's really cool about this is that, this experience was not triggered by a desire to go do this trip, although I'm sure it's something that was always in the back of your mind. It was actually a byproduct. I think for a lot of people, it's like, I'm going to go do this thing. But for you, it was like, no, there's a bigger transition that needs to happen. And then this thing just sort of fell in that space. That's just so cool. So can you tell us about the trip itself? Like what was kind of the plan and just sort of a broad overview of what you spent 2.5 months doing?
Yeah. So like the original intent was cycle across country. Get on the bike and ride for a couple months, enjoy myself, see a bunch of new stuff. Um, Immediately when I came up with this idea, I I wanted to do it solo. I use cycling as a meditative thing. I don't do group rides around town. I always go out and ride by myself. It's just something that allows me to kind of think and get away. And then immediately got just so much feedback from loved ones and people I really admire, and people that I trust, and folks in my circle, whatever you want to call it, that was like, hey, rethink doing this solo, whatever that may look at. Um, so the trip went from me going solo, kind of east to west, to me spending a lot of time researching um, and working with the Adventure Cycling Association out of Missoula, Montana, to identify another person or persons that were interested in doing this trip or had already kind of started planning it or were thinking about it. And they had, I'm a member there, and they have a companions kind of wanted help wanted
Very
post
cool.
board. And
Yeah.
so I spent some time kind of going through it, reached out to a few folks, and met someone that was going west to east. So did a little more research on that. The timing was a little bit later than I originally intended to, but it ended up working out really well because I had a few things I needed to deal with here in Charlotte. So yeah, the trip itself was leaving August 1st from Seattle, taking ferries and a bus over to the Olympic National Park on the far northwest side of Washington, starting at the ocean there just outside of Forks, Washington, and then working our way across through both through North America. So we're in both Canada and the U.S., and ending in the New England area. With a few things kind of mixed in where wanted to camp on some of the Great Lakes, wanted to see some areas that had never seen before, wanted to kind of duck into Canada to see some different parks and that sort of thing. So it was kind of an amalgamation of um, a few different routes and things and both ideas that once I met the gentleman who was looking for someone, we sort of talked through and spent some time and then adjusted our route based on some of the things I wanted to do and some of the things he wanted to do, and kind of compromised to come up with a plan that was, essentially Seattle to, the Connecticut, Boston area.
Yeah. So cool. And I think it was really cool. Like, obviously, I think you flew to Seattle, right?
Mm.
It's not on the water. So you had to go west to get all the way to the starting line because there's this, like, I think you posted photos on Instagram where your bike tire is literally touching the water
Yeah.
um, on the West Coast and then again on the East Coast. So it's like literally ocean to ocean. That was pretty cool that you did it that way.
Yeah, I got a rude awakening too, because that got out. It was cold. It was really cold that day. Of course, August 1st in Charlotte, it's hot as hell, and
Yeah.
in Washington it was very cold. So I'm like kind of dressed up and like I'm trying to get the bike close enough to get a picture with it in the water, and a wave comes through, and I'm like jumping out of the way, but trying not to get the bike to fall on the sand and get my feet wet and all this stuff. So it's like the first day started out with like, oh God, what have I got myself into here? Uh, it certainly got better from there. So.
Yeah, it's awesome. So, like some of the logistics, I go back to the advice that you got. Hey, like, why don't you rethink doing this solo? Just curious, what were some of the compelling reasons to do this with a companion?
I think the idea of um, having spent a lot of time about 2 months kind of training for it, and nearly being hit by like three or four different cars around town, and like literally witnessing people like hitting curbs and screeching to try and get around, like crazy things. I think it was really like that it was like, okay, like I have to realize that these can be weapons of destruction around
Mhm.
me,
Yeah,
and if I were to get hit, which I think spending this number of hours on a bike, your odds of getting hit are probably higher,
yeah,
or something happening. That just having someone who is close by on the route, especially out west in Montana and Washington, where you're just in the middle of nowhere for days on end. I think that was comforting to me. So that helped me with like getting over like the scared and the challenge part of kind of doing this. So during training, that's when I made that decision. And I vividly remember calling my mom and telling her, and you could hear her like shouting and cheering in the background again. So there was a component too of just, sometimes taking others' advice is a good thing to do.
yeah. And it's ultimately it's a safety thing was really
Yeah.
what it came down to. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but what was that like? I mean, there's the safety component, but what was it like for you to essentially connect with somebody that you didn't know before and then embark on this 2.5 month experience with that person? What was that like?
Yeah, that was honestly, that was a big challenge. Immediately we connected beforehand, we met beforehand just to make sure like we weren't going to be at each other's throats on day
Yeah.
one kind of thing. And we
Yeah.
we hiked Mount Mitchell together.
Cool. Yeah.
And so spent like 4 hours kind of just chatting in the forest as we're hiking up the mountain, and good conversation. And what I was really looking for was was this a person I could trust? Was this a person I felt, when something did happen, that person would like make smart decisions and know what to do, and can fit all those bills. And so I felt very comfortable, and that's when I was like, okay, he's someone that I can travel with and spend time with, even though we had very, very different interests, and a lot of times, didn't have a lot in common other than our love for cycling. So
Mhm. Yeah. So what was the kind of the nature of your experience together? Are you guys riding side by side? Or are you guys kind of just like starting in the morning and then I'll meet you at camp? Or like how did that kind of dynamic work for you guys?
yeah, we stayed together pretty good. I think usually Ken liked to ride ahead. So I was usually no more than like a quarter mile behind at most times, just trying to make sure we're keeping in like sight range of each other, that sort of thing. But again,
Gotcha.
for me, it was, and I told him very early, I'm like, hey, I'm a very independent person. Cycling for me is very much a quiet time.
Yeah.
um, so I was very upfront with him, like, hey, here's some kind of ground rules for me that I would really appreciate following, and he did the same, and I think we did a pretty good job of kind of sticking to those. But it was very much an agreement of like, hey, let's be smart and let's be safe together. But there were times where I was like, hey, I got to go deal with this thing over here. I'll meet you up ahead, or vice versa.
Yeah. And so I'm just for like advice for listeners real quick, like anybody that's thinking about doing something like this and potentially connecting with somebody that they've never met before to do something like this. Do you have
Yeah.
any kind of just sort of top recommendations that you would encourage somebody to do?
Yeah, don't be afraid by it.
Yeah.
Know going in that there's going to be challenges. There's going to be times where you may be at odds, or you may not think, and you may not make the same decision. But set ground rules up front. There was one example where there was a forest fire in Washington that literally closed the road we were supposed to ride, and the next road over was 200 miles south to get
Wow.
through the mountains. And I disagreed with the approach that the person I was riding with wanted to take. But I kind of worked through it with them and ended up kind of compromising a little and taking a path where ended up calling the Forest Service and getting feedback directly from the folks up there fighting the fire around what it was. And I think once we had that information, and again, we made that pact up front that like, hey, when information changes, we're going to use this information to help make this the best journey we can possible. And so we got new information, and that information allowed us to kind of immediately pivot and figure out a new route and that sort of thing.
Yeah. So, okay, and along this route, 4,200 miles, 2.5 months, what are the evenings like? Are you camping? Are you staying in hotels? What's that look like?
Yeah, I think I did the math. It was 75 days total. I had 9 off days, and the off days were like seeing family and friends. A couple days were just literally like, hey, I've just biked 500 miles without a rest. Let's take a rest day, that sort of thing. Um, so that puts me down at what, 66 days or something like that. Of those 66 days, 40 were camping, 10 were at family and friends, and the rest were hotel, motels, cabins, that sort of thing. You, several places you have to work with what you have,
Yeah.
but obviously the intent was to camp as much as possible.
And your cycling partner, what was he doing when you were hanging out with family and friends, or were you guys together or
Yeah, it kind of depended. We were together sometimes. One time I actually ended up flying out. So I managed it where I got to a city with an airport in time that I was able to fly and go to my wife's brother's 50th birthday party. So that was really
cool?
cool. So it's just kind of a mixture of things. And one stop, I got a chance to stop and see a friend of 25 plus years, and we got to hang out with him. And so we kind of did our separate thing on most of the
Yeah.
days that we were off.
There's such a mindset thing there though. Like people wouldn't think like, I'm doing this cross country trip. Like I can take a break halfway through and fly somewhere and go do this thing and then come back to where I started. Like, even though you're not like staying at home or whatever, like there's ways to kind of, it's just a kind of a cool little
Yeah,
mind
yeah,
shift.
it
I
was
like,
kinda surreal too, because my flight was from Buffalo, to Florida, but the layover was in Charlotte.
oh my gosh, that's
So
wild.
I'm like, I'm so close to home, yet so far away, so it was really funny. It was kinda surreal, and I kinda I kind of laughed when I saw my wife and her family. I was like, man, this trip just can't get any
You're like
funnier. I'm
almost
like in
hoping
Florida now.
maybe my flight will get delayed and I can sleep at home tonight or something like
Yeah.
that's
Yeah, but you're absolutely right. Like you have to, like a trip like this, you have to bake in some time for just not being on the bike. Otherwise the grind can be challenging.
yeah. It's a really interesting way to think about it. One thing I was really intrigued by when we spoke was just some of the technology. I mean, I want to talk about like process planning, like for the trip, but like a lot of the tech that you had with you. I mean, in the world that we live in today, it's so different than somebody had done this years ago. Like
Yeah.
you were very, very connected on this trip. Can you talk a little bit about some of the equipment that you had with you to make the experience a little bit more connected?
Sure. Yeah, I had like we were talking about I had like backups of everything. So I had a each of the day the route you can create on your phone, on a computer, wherever it is, and you can extract a file of it and download that to your cycling computer. So I had a nice cycling computer that had maps that I had downloaded, all the different maps of the states and countries I was going to be in. I had the various routes, either alternate routes, different ideas that we had come up with, kind of all downloaded to it. And if I needed to, that device had Wi-Fi, so I could tether it to my phone and update it and that sort of thing. So I had my cycling computer, then I had my phone, which through Google Maps and whatnot,
Right.
you can use a ton of different things, and I had various components with it. I had this little guy, which anyone doing a trip like this, I highly recommend. It's a Garmin InReach. I think for like $30 a month,
Yeah.
you can literally send a text message to anyone on planet Earth from anywhere. So there were so many times like rolling into camp, I just wanted to let my wife know I'm safe. So I just shoot a note just saying, no reception safely at camp. And she thanked me a lot for that afterwards. And it also sent tracking notes. So like all my family and friends who were interested in following along could see like kind of precisely where you were. So that was a fantastic device. And then I have the bicycle itself was obviously something really important. And I've been doing some like longish rides, like 2, 3 days kind of thing. So I had a nice touring bike with a long, wide, heavy steel frame. I had a seat that I had used for thousands of miles over years already. Handlebars set up the way I wanted to. I had racks, I had bags, and then I had a dynamo hub in the front, which is essentially as your wheel is spinning, it creates electricity. So it was used to charge both lights and run lights during while I'm riding. And it was also I had a USB outlet on it where I could plug in my phone and keep my phone charged through the whole trip. And then I also had a little battery pack that I would take to use to charge other things in the evening, that sort of stuff. So yeah, I was able to stay incredibly connected. And between that dynamo hub and just pedal power,
Yeah,
able
it's
to keep things charged
it's
and
it's
used
really
every
pretty
day. So
amazing. Like for people that listening that maybe aren't like in the cycling world, just like the realization that you've got all of that technology. 'Cause I think like one of the questions I asked you when we first spoke was like what would happen if you had lost your phone? And you're kind of like, well, no big deal. Because I got like three or four other backup devices.
yeah.
So
Oh yeah, the watch too. Yeah, the
yeah,
watch.
to watch too. So yeah, I mean, lots of different ways to get news, lots of different ways to get updates and keep your map. It's like I think I might have asked you if you had any paper, if you felt like you needed to carry paper maps with you, and I think you said you didn't need to because you had so many different devices.
Correct, correct. And um, one of the things through the adventure cycling, we had purchased some of their routes, so their GPX routes. They had tagged things like either food stops or mailboxes or postal service buildings. So there were several times where kind of looking ahead on the route, you could even see like, hey, if something were to break, fail, whatnot, I could get something mailed to me knowing that I'm going to be passing this
Mm,
postal station in the middle of nowhere, Montana in 3 days, or I think I will be passing it in 3 days. So there was actually a couple times where I mailed things home as I was just kind of like kind of gauging what I
yeah.
needed on the trip early on, especially where weight was a premium.
Yeah. I mean, there's a crossover to like something like this that you did and like doing the Appalachian Trail. I mean, there's a
Yeah.
lot of similarities in the planning process, right? So yeah, just in terms of the kind of the route, love to hear like some highlights. Then one of the things that you and I talked about was like I remember like watching you on Instagram and like you started, and then I swear it felt like it was like a month in and you were still in Montana, and I was like, man, this is it's the Wild West out there, the
Yeah.
wide Wild West.
Yeah. Well, there was so first off, Washington felt for, I mean, Washington on paper didn't look like, I knew Montana was going to be the big one.
Yeah.
The Washington didn't look too bad, but then the forest fire happened. And because of the way we started, we kind of started and routed ourselves a little north up into Anacortes. And then we're supposed to go across over the North Cascade National Park. And that's where the fire happens. Had to pivot, had to go down south through the Cascades. So you did a lot of like this through Washington, just kind of like up and down, north and south. Um, and then as we got to Montana, that's when like really high temps and smoke kind of set in from all the forest fires going on. And so some of the days in Montana where you were thinking, hey, maybe I'd be able to do like a 60 to 70-mile day, turned out to be like 30 or 40 because of just what we were dealing with. Um, and it just, again, like through the mountain areas, you just had to do so much north south traversing that it just felt like we were in those two states forever. And I know once kind of like started looking at the route, once you got to eastern Montana, it started actually turning east, and I just remember that lifted my spirits so much. I was kind of getting to the point where I was like, God, how much north south traversing do we need to do here? And then once started east, I just remember like my mood lightened. I got like excited, and I started actually, before that I wasn't looking at the map because it just I was just stuck in the northwest of the US. And once we started moving east, then I started looking at the map regularly and was like, wow, look at the progress being made. This is awesome. But that was literally like a month in.
Yeah. And I think if correct me if I'm wrong, I think you entered Canada through either Michigan or Minnesota.
Yeah, so entered Canada two times. Once into Alberta to check out Waterton National Park, which is like the
Oh, okay. Yeah.
northern part of
Yeah. Near
Glacier.
Glacier, right? Yeah.
Yep. And then the second time, from Michigan, dropped into Ontario and followed the northern border of Lake Erie through Ontario up into Buffalo. So it was in Canada for 4 total days.
Very cool. So, I mean, just in terms of like the 4,200 miles across country, couple of just natural highlights that stand out in your mind. What were some of your
Yeah,
favorites?
natural highlights. Obviously, the Cascades are just amazing. Like the temperature, the just everywhere you turn is just beautiful waterfalls and rivers. And so Washington was just unbelievable. Glacier National Park, if any of your listeners haven't been there, oh my gosh, figure out a way to
It's
get
amazing.
there and go.
So
It's so
beautiful.
amazing. For cyclists, going to the Sun Road, if you've never done that, highly recommend going out and riding it. It's not for the faint of heart. That's probably the most terrified and excited I've ever been on a bicycle. Um, and then I really enjoyed Wisconsin. In fact, I want to go back to Wisconsin and spend some more time cycling around. It's just beautiful countryside, not too crazy roads, and just lots to do, lots to eat, lots of campsites. So it was like a lot of them. It felt like you were in a place where you could. There were a lot of amenities, but you were also still kind of in the middle of nowhere. So those were the natural things that stood out.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I still have this image of going to the Sun Road. We did that. We drove it a couple of years ago, and I'm like, I'm not even sure I could envision cycling that. That's a big climb. It's very windy. It's a tight road.
Yep.
That must have been pretty intense.
Yeah, the last I think of climbs in terms of the elevation I have to complete on it as opposed to the mileage. So the last 800 feet of elevation, which is probably over a mile and a half or so, the wind kicked up and it was like 30, 40-mile-an-hour gusts. And when you've got a packed bike with bags on it and like I'm bundled up because it's freezing cold, when that wind hits you, like if it's from behind, it's pushing you up the mountain. If it's in front, you feel like you got to pedal as hard as you can to go 4 miles an hour. But it was from the side. So it was actually like moving me
Mm.
from like closer to the edge. And of course, I'm like starting to freak out that last 800 miles. So I start riding almost in the middle of the road, and I've got cars just honking at
Yeah.
me and yelling at me and whatnot. But of course, everybody's going slow. And I think at the end of the day, no, nothing bad happened, but it's such a drop off, and your mind is just seeing this massive drop off that you're like, I've got to get as far away from that with this wind gusting as I can.
Yeah.
So the last 800 feet vertical was like one of the scariest things I've ever done. And I just took it slow and easy. It was smart. Stopped a couple times to kind of like change the outfit to just make sure I was in the right setup for it. And then as I started seeing like the Logan Pass sign and whatnot, I mean,
Yeah.
your spirits are just like, I got the shivers right now just thinking about it because
It's
it's like
I'm
just
getting
the
it too.
coolest thing. Yeah,
It
yeah,
is. I mean, I
yeah.
did it by car. I can't even imagine. So, any city experiences on this trip?
Yeah, in fact, as we were talking about it, that was probably my favorite thing on all the trips was just the different cities I went to. I'd never been to Seattle. First, like I spent that first day I flew out there, I got out there early and I just hiked around Seattle for like 12 miles, just checking it out and seeing a lot of cool stuff. Minneapolis is an amazing town, so much bicycle infrastructure. Marquette, Michigan was really cool up in the UP. Would love to spend more time there. I thought Buffalo, New York was really cool. Just getting around there and then going up to see Niagara Falls. That was really cool.
Yeah.
Ended in New Haven, Connecticut, or just outside New Haven.
Yeah.
That was a cool town. So it was really cool for me because every town we went to, oh, Fargo, North Dakota was amazing. Every town I had gone through during the trip was someplace I had never been before. So seeing a new place for the first time is just one of the coolest feelings. And
Yeah.
seeing it on bike is just awesome because you see so much stuff that you wouldn't see otherwise.
Yeah, I mean, you really get to kind of experience it as opposed to just like whizzing by at, 60, 70 miles an hour on an interstate. Because the other thing too, when we just, you're not riding on interstates, obviously, you're like on back roads, I'm assuming. So
Correct,
um,
correct.
you're
Yeah,
seeing the
had to get on
whole
the
thing.
interstate once. That was a new experience for me. So
Wow.
for 10 miles between Webo, Montana and the border of North Dakota, there was
Wow.
really, really no other way but huge wide shoulders. Obviously terrified going down the on-ramp, but huge wide shoulders. It was a Sunday morning. It was really quiet. The route had been approved by the ACA saying
Wow.
like, hey, we recommend it's okay to ride here. And of course, I just kept thinking like, well, what excuse I'm going to use if a police officer comes over? It's like, hey man, you're riding on the, you're riding on the shoulder of an
Right.
interstate. Like,
Right. Right.
so that was pretty cool experience.
Well, one of the things that, again, we talked about the first time, you said that like one of your major learnings was just this, how to like deal with sort of the unexpected and how to pivot and some of the things. You had some pretty interesting things that happened on this trip. I'd love to talk about a couple of those stories.
Sure, sure. Yeah, the one that comes to mind is the one that's so vivid still to this day is losing one of my bags. So I had two bags in the front, two bags in the rear. Bike is incredibly heavy. It probably weighed like 60, 70 pounds. Um, one of the rear bags fell off, and that's not a place that you're typically like looking back because you have to look back and down to it. Usually, when you're looking back, you're looking for car traffic and
Yeah.
noise and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Um, so it fell off at some point in time in the morning and was about 30, 32 miles into the ride when I pulled over to stop and get off and just like, oh my God, where's my bag? And again, the immediate reaction is kind of to freak out and just like, I'm flustered. I'm using some bad words and just kind of like pounding things and take a second, step back, drink some water. And then I was like, well, I think I remember passing some railroad tracks that were really bumpy. So anywhere on the last 30 miles, if this bag had fallen off, it would have been those railroad tracks. So kind of look at my phone and go, that's probably like 7 to 10 miles back. I'm going to backtrack. So I talked to the guy I was riding with and just said, hey, I'm going to backtrack. You don't have to. That's going to add a lot of mileage to today. Why don't I meet you up ahead? And the next, I think it was like a 70 something mile day we had planned to kind of finish near Whitefish, Montana, which is a big town. So I also knew like there's infrastructure and that sort of thing that if I can't find my bag, I could probably order stuff in the mail and get it overnighted or whatnot. And the bag contained basically most of my camping supplies.
Yeah.
So it was stuff that was very, very
You
important
needed
for
it.
me.
Yep.
Yep. So backtracked, got to the railroad and no bag. And that was really disheartening at that point in time. I was like, all right, well, I gave it a shot. And you know, one of the things I had said to myself at the beginning of the trip is like, make some smart decisions. It's okay to pivot from them, but don't pivot too far right? And that's when I kind of said, okay, I'm not going to ride back the whole 30 miles for this bag. Like that's a bit much. So near the railroad tracks was a little store, little diner. So I walked in and just, I think everyone looked at me all funny and whatnot because there's this dejected, completely sweat-filled cyclist coming in. And of course they're like, "Hey, how can I help you?" And I was like, "Hey, just by any chance, has anyone dropped off a bag? Has anyone, seen I lost a bag?" And they were super nice, like, "No, sorry, but if we hear anything, you could leave your number." Um, so I did that, and as I was walking out, a gentleman who was sitting by the window just looked up and goes, "Hey, man, I'll help you find your bag." Older guy, and I was like, "Really?" He's like, "Yeah, let me finish my breakfast, and we'll take my truck and go find your bag." I was like, "All right, I'm not gonna turn that
Wow.
down." So I went outside, kind of sat on the porch. I remember I had signal, so I called my wife, and I was like, "Man, I screwed up. Somehow I'd like lost my bag and whatnot." And she was real positive and like, "Hey, don't worry about it." Like, told her about like the opportunity to potentially go find it. She's like, "All right, well, go find your bag, see what's going on." So Ron came out, um, and he immediately started chatting with me. He was a cyclist. He was a mountain biker, and I think that like when you and I talked, that was one
Yeah.
of the things that like kind of comfort me a little bit, knowing, okay, here's a
Right.
fellow cyclist. So we go to his truck, and and I remember this was like he had some unique things in his truck on the outside, at least. He had like a "Death to Fauci" sticker on it, and a bunch of stuff, just random stuff in the truck bed. But he had like enough room that I could like stuff my bike in it. Um, but he had I guess the pad that goes over the tailgate that mountain bikers use to like put their bikes over it to keep the bike
Okay.
from scratching and everything. And so
Got it.
like that immediately was like, okay, this guy knows what he's doing.
Got
He's
it.
got like this thing that I've seen that I know mountain bikers use. He says he's a biker, all that stuff. So I'm gonna trust this guy.
Yeah.
So I put my bike in, I put my bags in, I go to open the front door, and sitting on the center console is, I'm not a hunter or anything like that, is the world's biggest machine gun I have ever seen. Like the kind they use in the movies
Yeah.
for taking down the terrorists and all that. And he's got clips and bullets and just gun stuff everywhere in this car. And all I could think to myself is like, well, Ron seems really nice. I am in the middle of nowhere, Montana. We are, there are going to be things like this. Let's see what we got. I was like, all right, Ron, let's do this. So I got in and started chatting with him, and come to find out, his wife had just died of cancer a few months
Mm.
back. It was his birthday. He was on his way to see his kids after he had breakfast, but he was interested in helping me out and all that good stuff. So he drove the entire route back, which was awesome. Didn't see the bag. So we got to where the end of the route was, and I was like, I really appreciate everything. But I don't see the bag. It's okay. Like, would you mind dropping me back off? I'm just gonna ride back without that bag. And he looked at me. He's like, I got one other idea, Will. We're not giving up on this. Picks up his phone, not a speed dial or anything like that. He literally pushes the button because he knows the number to the police dispatch. Calls the police dispatch. They pick up and they're like, "Hey, Ron!" Like they know his number, and it's small world in the middle of
Yeah.
nowhere, Montana.
Yeah.
And Ron's like, "Hey, I'm helping the cyclist who's going cross country, lost his bag. By chance, anybody like drop anything off the police station or whatnot?" And the dispatcher goes, "Is that guy sitting beside you?" And Ron's like, "Yep, he sure is." So they give me the phone, put me on, and I'm just like, "Hey," they're like, "Hey, man, do you have sandals attached to your bag?" And I'm like, "I sure do." And then that's like immediately I was like, "Holy crap!"
Wow.
Like this is. So they're like, "Yeah, I was surfing the web and found on Facebook someone posted in the neighborhood that they'd found a bag and that they're going to put it here and here." And Ron, I'm on speaker with him, so Ron hears all that. He's like, "I know where that is." So Ron drives me to go get the bag, reunites me with the bag. I mean, it's like, this is like 2 hours now of just hanging out with Ron, driving around middle of nowhere, Montana, get reunited with the bag, kind of give him a hug, and we talk a little bit, and he ends up going to see his kids after that, and I'm on my way, and it turned out to be like almost like a 90-mile day and like 95-degree heat or whatnot, but I was just riding on emotion, so stoked to have the bag back. And from that point on the trip, every time I got on, I checked, make sure those bags were strapped down. That's a quick
Man,
lesson learned there.
I feel like there's so much to that story though. Like that first of all, that's like probably one of the most memorable things that happened to you. Like, yes, it was a 90-mile thing that you went through, but like just this whole thing, like when we were first talking, I asked you the question, like, you know, what was going through your mind when you're like about to get in the car with a stranger? And I guess you thought about it a little bit because it sounds like there were some signals that kind of gave you some comfort. And I thought it was funny when we were talking, like, I think you made mention to me that he did comment on the gun and gave
Yeah.
you made some comment that made you feel better.
Yeah, yeah, I looked at the gun about halfway through the drive. I mean, we didn't approach the subject when I got in the car. I kind of
Yeah.
want to be like, Ron, like if I'd known him a little bit better, I'd been like, Ron,
Right.
what's going on here, man? Uh, but halfway through, he noticed me looking at it and he's like, don't worry about the gun, Will. It's for your and my safety. And I was like,
I
all
love
right,
it.
thanks, Ron.
Well, it's funny. Like one of the things we talk about on this podcast a lot is Joseph Campbell's hero's journey, and I don't know if you're familiar with that, but like in the process of the hero's journey that he describes, it's sort of this mythical experience. But when you have the courage to step across the threshold and go on these epic journeys, there has this tendency of these so-called supernatural guides to just sort of show up along the way. And I'm just thinking like this guy Ron like was just this mythical guide that sort of showed up for you. And
Mythical Ron, I love it.
you lost this bag, but then he shows up to help you. I'm just wondering, like, was there any like deeper learning that you had on this? I mean, from from maybe judgment and like getting in the car and seeing this gun and having fear, but realizing like this guy is he's just a human. He just lost his wife. And honestly, he probably got more out of the whole experience than you did.
Well, it's really easy to lose the perspective on a trip like this, that people are still like really good,
Yeah.
especially when you're getting passed by cars and 9 out of 10 cars are giving you room and slowing down. It's that 1 out of 10 that whizzes by you and doesn't move over or honks at you or rolls down their window or yells at you or pulls up and hits their engine and smogs you with their diesel dust and all that stuff. That like it's real easy to like forget, like, man, these drivers are assholes.
Yeah.
um and when someone who's driving a big pickup truck and in the middle of nowhere Montana is willing to do something like this for you, you're just like, wow, there still are awesome people out there.
Yeah.
um I wonder if I'd lost my bag like on the East Coast, if I'd experienced the same kind of like compassion and willingness from a stranger that I would where I was in the middle of Montana. So that's
Yeah.
hopefully I never have to experience that, but it just it reinvigorates you that there are
Totally.
good people out there and the human condition is still solid. So
Totally. Ron sounds amazing. I'd like to meet him someday. He sounds awesome. So, man, I could talk to you for like another couple of hours on this whole thing. As you kind of got towards the end, you got towards through the Great Lakes into Buffalo, you're kind of on the East Coast. Like, what were the final days for you? Like, were you excited to be done? Were you wishing that the trip was going to continue? Like, I'm kind of curious about that.
yeah, Michigan broke my spirit a little bit, especially the Upper Peninsula. Just no bicycle infrastructure, no shoulders, logging trucks going 80 miles an hour. Nobody put like I don't think they saw cyclists on the road up there on a regular basis. And so Michigan really was like, oh my gosh, like I'm out here doing this and I'm putting myself through this and I could get hit at any moment in time. I remember a logging truck going like 6 inches by me at
Mm,
70 miles an hour or something and just being like, oh, like just having to get off the road and like take a deep breath to just like, okay, I can do this. I can do this.
yeah.
Um, but Ontario lifted the spirits. The people in Canada were awesome. The places we stayed in Canada were awesome. And then I got to New York, and New York is where I split from riding with Ken. So I got the last like 6 days, kind of just to like soak it all in, do it on my own, that sort of thing. And the second to last day, so leaving Albany, New York, and finishing in kind of central Connecticut, was just awesome and like just so much emotion. And the ride was challenging, but the weather was awesome. And like I think I I think I did like 80 miles and like 5,000 vert that day. So it was like, I even think I remember posting on social media. It was like both the strongest and the worst I've felt in a long time, whatever
Yeah.
that means for being on a bicycle. But yeah, there were a couple times where I got emotional, just riding the bike and just start getting like teary eyed, thinking like,
Yeah.
holy crap, what have I done here?
Yeah.
Um, and and at the same time too, it was also like still like, all right, I am so ready to go home. I am so ready to like sleep in my own bed. I am so ready to spend some time with my wife and see my dog who I hadn't seen on the trip. Every dog I saw, I was like, "Can I talk to your dog? I just want to pet him because I'm a big dog person." So there was a component of me like just kind of driving to finish. There was a component of me just like so ecstatic to be out there doing it, and there was a component as well that was just like, this is a grind. Like had I like because when I set out on this, I really said to myself, I just want to spend 2 months on the bike.
Mhm.
But then as it became more real that I actually can do this and finish it, at the end, it was like, all right, let's finish this. So that
Yeah.
grind of finishing it, even when you're riding in places that you're just like, there's nothing cool to see here, or like you're just mile after mile of just in the woods with no one around you and that sort of thing, where you're just like, all right, we just got to do this. We just got to pump them out.
Yeah. Well, it's so awesome. And I love the way that you did it too, because you didn't just cycle home. Charlotte's not all the way to the coast, right? You chose to go to New England,
Yep.
and I believe your wife flew up to meet you.
Actually, parents ended up coming up because I had
Nice.
just seen
Okay.
my wife the week before in
Okay.
Florida, and my folks wanted to like be a part of it.
Yeah.
So I picked a spot on a little rail trail, and my dad, who does some cycling, and he likes like
Yeah.
10, 15 miles, that sort of thing. I picked a spot about 16 miles from the beach where I wanted to finish, and my parents met me. My dad hopped on the bike, and the two of us rode the last hour together. It was awesome.
So cool. So you had 2.5 months to kind of have this experience. And 2.5 months prior to you finishing, you quit your job with no plan.
Yeah,
So did you get any clarity during that 2.5 months?
I did. Um, like I was going through so many different ideas of what I wanted to do and how I wanted to spend my time in the future and where I wanted to focus my energy, and I got really good clarity on that. And I'm actually like on my other screen here is my resume, and I'm sending out a bunch of stuff and having a lot of conversations with folks right now. And so like having that clarity and that like kind of certainty for my next decision and steps. And I had mentioned to you that my favorite part of the trip was just going to these new cities and exploring, and I
Yeah.
loved like kind of the urban aspect of the ride. So one of the things I want to do, and my wife is very supportive of it, is I'm interested now in moving to some place where I can be in an urban environment and spend some time on the on the bike, and hopefully be somewhere where I can bike to work on a regular basis, and spend time outdoors more often and that sort of thing. Kind of get away a little bit from like kind of the car congestion. So that's something that I'm also kind of like looking forward to and going to be kind of focusing energy on as well.
It's amazing. Well, I have to believe that any employer that has opportunities wants somebody that has the courage, the integrity, and the wisdom that you have to be able to go on a trip like this. It says so much.
I certainly hope so, and I will say through good learning that if they don't, I don't think I want to be with them. So it'll work
I
out
love
well.
that. I love that. It makes total sense.
Yeah,
Will, can you say this trip changed you?
yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think so. Um, it has reminded me of things I need to work on to keep all the good things in my life being good. It has reminded me that um, work and that grind and that feeling that you have to like work to like achieve something and save money to achieve something and that sort of thing. It's like, why are we doing that to ourselves? Go out, enjoy things. The training for the ride, like just so much, like I had so much fun doing it, like a little day trip with my dog to go hike in like Western North Carolina or ride my bike on some trail I'd always want to go on, but just have never mustered up the energy because I was like too tired or whatnot. So it reinforced all these things that I had kind of known but lost sight of through just the grind of work and the grind of kind of not taking some time for yourself.
Yeah, I love it. Well, I want to ask you about advice that you might have for people listening to this episode. I kind of want to frame it around the the fear that people might have about things that could go wrong. And then this reminder that you just did this epic 2.5 month journey, and there's things that went wrong along the way and you pivoted, but there were people like Ron that were there to help you. And ultimately, one of the most amazing things that happened on this trip for you was that you went 4,200 miles and did not have a single flat tire.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember passing a guy riding the other way who was carrying a trailer, and he had done Milwaukee, or he was doing Milwaukee to the West Coast, and he had 3 flats the day before on like some gravel road that I was going to be on the next day. And I just remember thinking to myself, like, oh my gosh, I hadn't even thought about this flat situation. So what I would give advice to folks thinking about it is like there will always be something. Can't focus on that. Have to focus on the good. Um, and I, th- I, th- I think you got to start small too. Um, by no means was this the first time I've ridden a bike, and even like an overnight trip, all that is all I did was just string together 70 overnight trips.
Yeah.
So like when you compartmentalize it a little bit, it's easier to digest. You feel less overwhelmed by it. Um, Involve people in decision making. That's another big thing. It's like there were several times where I was like, man, I'm not really entirely sure what to do. Let me let me phone a friend. Let me ask
Yeah.
someone who I know and like, hey, I'm thinking about doing this. Do you think this is crazy? Like give me some feedback or evidence of why I wouldn't do. So there's ways to like kind of build your confidence
Yeah.
to make a step like this. And then again, like, if you think it's something you want to do, you plant that seed, it's hard to get rid of it. So go give it a shot. Like, yeah, give it a shot.
I love it. Well, such an awesome inspiration. Like, thank you for being the model. Like, to be willing to just say, you know what, I don't know what's next for me, but I'm trusting in myself. I'm gonna make this change that I want to make. And then you go on this epic 4,200 mile journey, no flats, and you figure out what you need to figure out. And as we talk right now, you still don't know what the future holds, but you know that it's coming. And I'm just saying that somebody that can do such epic things, Hollywood's going to reach out to you at some point. They're going to want to make a movie about your story. And I want to know when they do, who's going to be the Hollywood actor that's going to play you in your movie.
So for full clarity, you sent me this question ahead of time, so I had a chance to think about it. My first reaction was, there's a TV show I love right now on Hulu called The Bear.
Okay.
And it's about a guy who quits working at like the most prestigious restaurant in the world to go back home, work in this like dump of a restaurant that serves like crappy sandwiches in Chicago, and he wants to like elevate it and make it this thing.
Nice.
Um, and the first actor that came to my mind, I love, there's a Canadian chef called Matty Matheson.
Okay.
Big, wild, like outgoing guy. He's awesome. I was like, I should do Matty. And I remember my wife going, I don't think he can ride his bike across country. I was like, that's probably a good point. So I'll take the lead actor. I think his name is Jeremy Allen White, the guy who plays Carmy in the show.
Okay.
And for those that haven't seen the show, I highly recommend it. It's phenomenal, and it's a lot about like the human spirit, about like taking a chance on yourself as well. So highly recommend the show called
Awesome.
The
So
Bear.
Jeremy Allen White.
Yeah, I think that's his name. Yeah.
Awesome. What's your movie going to be called?
Late bloomer.
Ooh,
Late bloomer.
nice.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
like
It's
that.
taken
Late
taken me a
bloomer.
long time to get to this mental state. So
I got it, but you did
yeah.
it. Late bloomer
Yeah.
starring Jeremy Allen White. Okay. Finally, if people have questions for you, maybe want to connect with you, or maybe they've got an employment opportunity for this amazing human that I'm talking to right now, what's the best way for people to get a hold of you?
Uh, career stuff, I'm on LinkedIn.
Great.
Social media, I'm on Instagram, and I think you mentioned that I'll be able to like send you those links so folks can
Yep.
get to it. Folks can also email me. I'll put my email in there as well.
Great.
But yeah, those 3 methods, I'm looking at them all the time, and it's easy to get in touch with me on any of them.
Definitely. And we will have all that in the show notes so people can find that there as well. So thank you so much for spending some time with me today. I really appreciate it. And for those listening, hope you've been inspired today as much as I have. I hope Will's story has encouraged you to listen to the voice inside that calls you to adventure, because we want to hear your story next. You have a story to tell or just need a nudge to create one, please send me an email. We'd also appreciate it if you'd help us spread the word by leaving a review and sharing or tagging Inspire Campfire in your social media. And until next time, I want to encourage you to get outside. Thank you for listening. Will, thanks so much for being here today.